Just let me know.
Madam Chair, we are live.
Okay, thank you. At 5:05, I will call to order the Public Works and Utilities Committee meeting for today, July 22nd, 2024. And if we could get a roll call, please.
Certainly, Madam Chair. Counselor Lee Garcia,
He's excused.
Counselor Amanda Chavez,
She's excused.
Counselor Alma Castro,
Presente.
Counselor Michael Garcia,
Present.
and Acting Chair Romero Worth.
I am here.
You have a quorum, Madam Chair.
All right, terrific. Do we have changes to tonight's agenda?
No changes from staff, Madam Chair.
Okay, any changes for the committee? And if not, is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the agenda for tonight, and I guess we can do that by roll call because we don't have anybody on Zoom. All those in favor, aye. Anybody opposed? That motion passes. We are on to approval of the consent agenda. Were there items pulled from consent, and are there any changes to the consent agenda tonight?
Yes, Madam Chair, there something was pulled. It was item G. Let me take a look here.
Item G is accepting the money for pickleball court.
That's correct.
Request for approval of a New Mexico Department of Finance and Administration Capital Appropriation Grant 23-H3205 in the amount of $650,000 for pickleball courts at Fort Marcy Park with a reversion date of June 30th, 2027. And that item was pulled.
There is one other item that was pulled. Trying to understand what this is. Any of these counselors know what it is?
I did it. I pulled the item J.
An item J. Thank you
Okay,
so much.
okay. Item J is a bill authorizing the city of Santa Fe, known as the borrower under this agreement, to enter into a loan agreement with the New Mexico Environment Department for the purpose of obtaining project loan funds in the principal amount of 151 million plus accrued interest. I won't read the rest of this, but that gives you the general idea. All right, so we have items G and J. Anything else the committee would like to hear? And if not, is there a motion?
To approve the agenda as amended.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as amended. All those in favor, aye.
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 Anybody opposed? That motion passes. Back on to our agenda, public comment. Do we have anyone here tonight for public comment? And is there anyone on Zoom?
Madam Chair, I don't see anyone on Zoom. Ben, do you in the back see anybody on Zoom?
We have two on Zoom. Regina Wheeler, Rhonda Holderman. Nobody for public comment.
Okay. All right. Then we will move on to our presentations. Tonight, we are getting a presentation from Clinton Peterson, who's an associate or engineer associate. Pulling this up. And the presentation on how do I say this correctly? Flocculation and sedimentation improvements at Canyon Road Water Treatment Plant. Take it away. Oh yeah, sorry, you need to make sure the light's on, and then
Okay.
you can put that mic up on the side, just to so it's higher, you don't have to lean down so much.
All right. So I'm here today just to give you guys a very brief overview, high level on a upcoming construction project that we're pretty excited about it here in the Water Division. Flocculation and sedimentation upgrades to the Canyon Road Water Treatment Plant. So the Canyon Road Water Treatment Plant is on Upper Canyon Road. It's one of our two surface water treatment facilities, the other one being BDD. And those two facilities provide water, the majority of the potable water to the city for the majority of the year. It was originally constructed in 1971 with some minor upgrades and improvements since then. And just the location. So we have an active construction project going on in the watershed right now, the Nichols Reservoir Rehabilitation Project. So you can see here from the aerial, McClure Reservoir is located above Nichols, which is located above Canyon Road Water Treatment Plant. And this is where we're getting water from. And so just to give you guys a quick overview of how we treat raw water. So at the Canyon Road Water Treatment Plant, there's the rapid mix and flocculation and the clarification and settling. This is kind of like the first half of the water treatment process for raw water. And this is kind of what the construction project is aimed at renovating. After the flocculation and then the sedimentation process, it goes to our gravity filters and then a final chemical treatment before entering the distribution system. A comprehensive performance evaluation was done by Carollo, who's one of our engineering firms that we work with. And what they found was that the water quality from the Nichols Reservoir is generally pretty good, but there's a little bit of variability throughout the season. So there's high amounts of naturally occurring manganese in the watershed along with iron. And this is kind of what's contributing to a couple past brown water quality events. There's no health hazard associated with brown water, but it's just an aesthetic hazard. So occasionally we'll get calls from people whenever events like this happens. And it's because of the high amounts of manganese. And there's high turbidity events from spring runoff or low reservoir levels. And the evaluation also found that the current plant process equipment is not really well optimized, and it's outdated. It's this really old equipment and it's really showing its age. In the bottom picture there, those are tube settlers. A lot of them, if you view them in person, have a bunch of really visible damage and cracks, and they're exposed to UV radiation from the sun.
Mr. Peterson, can I get you to pause for just a second? Counselor Lee Garcia, I believe, is needing to be promoted into the meeting, if we can do that. That'd be great. Sorry to interrupt you. You can go ahead.
And so the performance evaluation had several recommendations come out of that. One of them was to install an aeration system in Nichols Reservoir, which is currently being done with the Nichols construction project right now. And they also recommended improving the clarifiers, the filters, chemical processes, lab systems, controls, repairing the structures where necessary, installing new equipment. And so this construction project will address many of these findings. Here's a brief project timeline. And so that comprehensive performance evaluation and facility optimization evaluation was finished by Carollo in March of 2020. They also completed 100% drawings for the design back in September of 2021. And our invitation to bid recently got published July 9th of this month. And if we find a construction contractor, then we're anticipating construction that starts either in the winter of this year or early spring of next year. And the pre-bid conference is actually scheduled for tomorrow morning, July 23rd. And we're looking at approximately a 26-month construction schedule. So roughly 2 years, depending on the contractor. And the latest cost estimate we had from Carollo was approximately $12.8 million. And that was done at the 90% design March 1st of 2021. And so this number is a little bit outdated. Costs have probably gone up since then. And so that's just very brief overview. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to take any.
Great. Questions from the committee? Counselor Michael Garcia, and if you can help me, Director Wheeler, about if Counselor Lee Garcia has questions. And if we can get the screens in the chambers to turn on again, they seem to have gone off. And maybe if we just take this, well, I don't know, Counselor Michael Garcia, if you wanted to see that presentation or not. But this is good, the way we have it here now, because I can see Counselor Lee Garcia if he has questions. So with all that complication, Counselor Michael Garcia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Two quick questions. The $12.8 million figure, that is from 2021?
That's correct.
Okay, and is there a reason why we can't get an updated figure? Just because I think that could drastically impact the proposed amount. I mean, I'm not a engineer or deal with this type of specifics, but due to inflation over the last couple of years, that price, I'm expecting it to increase. I don't know if it's in the millions, if it's the hundreds of thousands, but is it possible for us to get an updated number on this?
Madam Chair, Counselor Garcia, thank you for your question. Yes, this is an outdated number, and we're working with Corolla right now to potentially get an updated estimate. We expect, I guess, more accurate numbers whenever we receive bids from potential contractors that will tell us. We aren't sure exactly. A lot of construction materials have been heavily impacted by inflation and
Right.
costs going up. So
Right.
unfortunately, I don't have a great answer as to what an updated cost estimate would look like.
Okay, thank you. And I think the second part of that was not only the costs going up, but materials being available. I know that has been problematic in the industry in general. And is this timeline actually achievable due to potential lack of tools, equipment, whatever materials, whatever it is needed to complete this project? Or would the RFP applicants kind of give a time frame when they submit their proposal?
Madam Chair, Counselor Garcia, just to, I guess, the 26-month estimate was put together by Corolla, I guess, finalized in the 100% design. And so that might be a little bit outdated. We're seeing long lead times for especially electrical equipment with our Nichols rehabilitation project right now. We kind of expect contractors to take that into consideration whenever they're submitting proposals, and also we'll work with them pretty closely to develop a realistic timeline. 26 months is kind of what our engineering design firm has given us. It could be more, it could be less. The other factor to consider is kind of experience and manpower of the contractor. There are certain construction firms that may just have a lot of people that they're able to mobilize and get certain things done on time, but yeah, there will be certain materials that we expect long lead times for.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Peterson. If we can get an update once the project we determine who wins the bid, et cetera, cost and timeline, just that way we can make sure to share that information with any constituents that might be inquiring.
Absolutely.
And then last question I have is source of funding. Where is the money coming from for this project?
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia. So right now we're funding it through our Water Enterprise Fund. We've applied to two sources of funding. One is the Water Trust Board. So we submitted that application earlier this year. We were rejected on the first round of funding just because we didn't get our financial audit completed on time. And then the other source of funding is the New Mexico Drinking Water State Revolving Loan. And I just got, I guess, an email last week stating that we ranked, I think, number 3 on their list. So we're going to fill out that application very soon. So that's another possible source of funding.
Okay, so right now, the primary source of funding is enterprise fund and then potential supplemental grants that
Correct.
out of curiosity, have we been exploring that over the past couple of years? Do you know, your knowledge?
I recently, I guess, took over the project relatively recently, so I'm not exactly sure what the history of funding behind the project is or any other grants that we've applied for.
Okay. Thank you. Well, thank you for the update, Mr. Peterson. I really appreciate it. No other questions, Madam Chair?
Other questions from the committee? Counselor Castro?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also had some questions around funding, so why don't we start there and then I'll ask some other questions. Thank you for the presentation. So this could be for you also, Madam Chair, maybe for finance. Is this funded at all? Is it fully funded? Do we have some money that has been already allocated to this, or do we have to find it still?
Madam Chair, Councilor Castro, thank you for your question. As far as I know, we should be fully funded from the Water Enterprise Fund for now.
Sorry, it looks like he wanted to, Director Roach wanted to back you up, but that was the answer.
Madam Chair, Councilor Castro, I just wanted to make sure Clinton knew I was here to answer the funding questions, which are probably a little more in my lane than his, but so far he's hit them all out of the park. I would say we have budgeted in our CIP, 5-year CIP plan, I think $15 or $16 million towards this project. And we have financial projections for our for the water utility that go out 5 years and incorporate that budget. And so at the moment, those scenarios would have this, one scenario would be fully funded from cash in the Water Enterprise Fund, and another scenario would have it partially funded by a grant that Clinton mentioned that we applied for through the Water Trust Board. However, we will continue to seek funding wherever we can.
We heard from other departments that rates might be raising. As of yet, we don't see any raised rates at this point.
Are you talking about water rates?
Yes, our water utility rates.
So there is pressure based on those scenarios for us to look at increased revenues, but we don't know exactly how we'll do that yet. And that will be the subject of forthcoming presentations to the committee and potentially the governing body.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And then if you do know, my other question is about the last update. I know we said that we have some outdated equipment, and I imagine we've updated since 1971. Do we know when the last update was?
Madam Chair, Councilor Castro, I don't know. I can't give you exact dates. I know there, the tube settlers that I showed you, I think in a previous slide, I think those were put in a few decades ago. I don't know exactly when. It's received some TLC. We're replacing filters right now as well. So there have been minor improvement projects since 1971, absolutely. It's not definitely
It
not.
sounds like nothing
original.
major. Yeah, and in the last maybe 20 years.
This is a
probably.
pretty major construction project that will overhaul basically half of the front half of our water treatment process there.
Perfect. Thank you all so very much. No further questions.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Lee Garcia is on Zoom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And you'll have to excuse the background noise here. I'm at the airport. And, just to kind of maybe spin off in questions regarding the funding, and this will probably come to finance, but so if the proposals were in 2021, we were to find out that what would be the percentage increase that we would be comfortable maybe reevaluating or going out to bid for other offers that could be lower or maybe the same. I don't know.
Madam Chair, Counselor Lee Garcia. I don't think we have a hard cap. We'll have to evaluate the bids as they come in. It'll also depend on the number of bids that we get. Ideally, we would get a handful of bids and we can evaluate them competitively. And obviously cost would play a pretty big aspect to selection of our construction contractor.
Thank you. I think that's really about it. One more question would be is in regards to the filtration. So it's basically a similar system that would be filtering our water, correct?
Sorry, I can't really hear you through the Zoom very well. Did somebody catch that?
I don't know if I don't
Maybe
know
Counselor, if you could just try the question one more time, maybe it'll come through better.
So basically it's another filtration system, from my understanding, for the water system that's coming off of the reservoirs.
So the filters are separate from the flocculation process, which is separate from the sedimentation process. So I'll go back to, I guess, the aerial view. The raw water comes in and it goes through this rapid mix and flocculation process. Oh, I see.
If we could get IT help just to see the presentation again as Mr. Peterson walks us through. There we go. Thank you.
So the first part where the raw water comes in, you can see in the lower left of that aerial view, it says rapid mix and flocculation, which feeds into the clarifiers. These are the settling basins. The project is not aiming to completely redo the way that we're treating water. It's just new equipment. And so the tube settlers that we have right now, just to kind of give you an example of an improvement that we're making, is the tube settlers will be replaced with plate settlers. And so it's just another type of settling equipment. And with the upgrade of equipment, there are certain, I guess, variables that will be improved. More detention time, less short circuiting of water within the treatment process. And that's kind of the project is focused, I guess, on the first half before it gets to final filtration with our gravity filters. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you very much for that response. I think that what comes to mind is what happened in Las Vegas with the fires and them having an issue with filtering out. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, yeah, with the amount of sediment and stuff that was coming into their filtration systems off of their watershed. And so I don't know if that addresses any of this for situations such as that.
Madam Chair, Counselor, thank you for your question. That's absolutely a valid concern. I would say in the event that something catastrophic like that were to happen in our watershed, that would be, I don't think, something that any sort of conventional water treatment facility could really handle. There are things that we are thinking about to address something like that in the future. For example, running a bypass channel around the Nichols Dam from McClure Dam and using Nichols as kind of a giant settling basin. I think that was something that Jonathan Montoya and Jesse were talking about whenever they visited Las Vegas and as kind of a lessons learned from that visit. And so it's definitely something that we are concerned about. A fire in the watershed is probably the most disastrous scenario that we can think of. But I think this project is mostly designed to replace aging equipment and to kind of help with the throughput of the plant as well.
All right, thank you. Thank you for those answers, and we're looking forward to seeing what transpires with this. No further questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. Just really quick, how would you characterize this project in terms of importance? I mean, it's 1971, I think is what you're saying, since it was last kind of rehabbed. It's pretty important, isn't it?
Madam Chair, thank you. Yes, I would say it's pretty important as far as our priorities go. We're kind of looking at our timeline of big construction projects in the engineering section would go probably finishing up the Nichols Dam Rehabilitation Project, and then this project, rehabbing our one of our two primary sources of surface water for the city. And then third would maybe be a similar dam rehabilitation project on McClure. So it is a pretty important project.
Okay, and in the top three, it sounds like for the water division and for the resiliency of our overall water supply.
I would say so. As far as big construction projects go, obviously there's other projects like main replacements,
Right,
but as far as CIPs go, this is a pretty important project.
great. Thank you. That's the only question I had. If there are no further questions for the committee, I can't see Counselor Lee Garcia on Zoom. If there's a way to get one screen where I could see him, that'd be helpful. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate the presentation. Okay, we will go on to our consent agenda. And we did have two items to consider. The first is item G, request for approval of a New Mexico Department of Finance Administration Capital Appropriation Grant 23-H 3205 in the amount of $650,000 for pickleball courts at Fort Marcy Park with a reversion date of June 30th, 2027. And we have Scott Overlive with Parks and Open Space Project Administrator to answer questions. Councilor Castro, I believe you pulled this item.
Did indeed. Thank you so much. And I appreciate, Scott, your time. We won't take up too much of that because we know that Parks is very, very busy these days. I just wanted to know a little bit more about the project. I know that there's a big zealous group of folks that like to play pickleball, and we are quickly outgrowing our pickleball courts. And so they approached us, in particular, the Pickleball Club, to do a new pickleball, not a study, they did the design through their club. And then we had some capital appropriations, is my understanding. And now we have the ability to build some new courts. Is this funded fully? I'll have the same questions. Funded fully, and there is going to be some downtime on our current pickleball courts as well, correct?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Chairwoman Castro. Yes. With this money coming in right now, we will have enough funding to go ahead and build the courts. And the initial design was paid for by donations from the Pickleball Club. And as it was determined that the existing courts that we have at Fort Marcy were basically being overrun. We just had a lot of pickleball players coming in, and we needed more pickleball courts. The design is complete, and we are basically shovel ready. And so with this funding coming in now, we will proceed directly to contractual part of the work and get the contractor signed up.
Perfect. And in the interim, where can folks find other pickleball courts in the city of Santa Fe?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councilor Castro. The Romero Park is probably going to be the best. This is the county park that's on the south side off of Lopez Lane. And I think it changes the name as it's heading out there. I don't think it's Lopez anymore. I can't recall what the name of it is off the top of my head. But there's the new pickleball courts that were put in by the county, and we're expecting to see some overflow go that way. We do have some ability for some pickleball at Salvador Perez Park, where we have some pickleball schematics on the tennis courts there as well. But we expect the majority to probably move, down to the Romero, and then the pickleball courts at Fort Marcy won't be closed permanently during the construction. It will be a little bit of off and on, depending on the type of construction that's taking place.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate that, Mr. Overly. And before I get the questions from the tennis community, last year we did invest in resurfacing some tennis courts, and there are some tennis courts that will be resurfaced in the near future, is my understanding.
We actually rebuilt 2 courts. The Herb Martinez court was completely rebuilt with a new post-tension slab, and the Largoite Park tennis court was also completely rebuilt. And then we are looking at resurfacing Alto courts and the Salvador Perez courts here very soon.
Thank you so much, Mr. Overly. No further questions, Chair.
Thank you. Just a quick question. How long will it take to do the pickleball construction at Fort Marcy?
Madam Chair, we're hoping to have the construction under contract in fall of this year, and we're looking to have completion by spring of 25.
Okay,
Getting ahead of myself.
thank you. Other questions from the committee? Since Councilor Castro brought up tennis, the Atalaya courts have been in line. Do you know what's current thinking about when those courts are going to be?
They're presently still on our list for resurfacing, and we're looking to get funding to resurface those as well.
All right, I get asked about that periodically, so helpful to kind of get an update. If there are no other questions from the committee, is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve this item. Because we have Counselor on Zoom, I do need a roll call, please.
Certainly, Madam Chair. Counselor Lee Garcia,
Yes.
Counselor Amanda, Alma Castro,
Yes.
Counselor Michael Garcia,
Yes.
and Counselor Romero Worth.
Yes,
Motion passes.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here. Okay, the last item we have on consent tonight is item J. This is consideration of bill number 2024-8, adoption of an ordinance, a bill authorizing the city of Santa Fe to enter into a loan agreement with the New Mexico Environment Department for the purpose of obtaining project loan funds in the principal amount of $151 million plus accrued interest, designating the use of the funds for the purpose defined in the most current project description form as approved by NMED, declaring that necessity for the loan, providing that the loan will be payable and collectible solely from the borrower's pledged revenues defined below, prescribing other details concerning the loan and the security for that purpose. We have Jesse Roach here, the division director for the water division. We also have Michael Dozier at the podium with the wastewater division, and Deborah Trujillo with environmental services. And I believe Counselor Michael Garcia, you pulled this item.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Dozier, and I don't know if you'll be able to answer this question, but I definitely would like to get an answer for this before I commit to approving this or give my support of this proposed ordinance. And so to give a little history, back in 2022, the city of Santa Fe passed a resolution 2022-56. It was sponsored by former Councilor Rivera and current Councilor Romero Worth. And the resolution directed the city manager to identify and apply for federal and state funding sources for water, wastewater, and other related projects. And one of the actions, or two of the actions I'm going to go over that I'd like to get an update on is in the resolution, it called for the city manager to identify by way of example and not limitations, water, wastewater, water conservation, water treatment, water recycling, water reuse, water storage, water conveyance, water delivery, flood prevention, watershed restoration, watershed management, and other similar projects, priorities, and research identify potential federal, state, and funding sources for such projects. So, Mr. Dozier, are you aware of any research, investigation, applying for either federal or state funding for projects such as I listed earlier?
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, I know the wastewater division has a few requests out for applications to get grants. We're also working with the loans, and we've also looked at matching funds. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. I know wastewater has.
Okay, but so can you go over what we're applying for? Because right now, or how any of those potential funding sources are applicable to this proposed loan that might enter into, the $151 million loan. So for example, the big chunk of it, the wastewater treatment plant, are there any loans that we've submitted an application to or currently investigating to offset the costs?
So Madam Chair and Councilor Garcia, we have not searched for loans per se or granting funding for the treatment plant build yet, as most of those grants you would have to have at least idea of what it is you're building. Now, on portions such as one that we are working on with the Water Smart aquatic ecosystem restoration, that's one to restore the ecosystem area that is along the river, right where you're headed towards the Santa Fe River behind the plant. In that area, that's one of the areas we're trying to focus on to try to get some grant funding to work on restoring that area. We tend to utilize cash balances and funding that we have already for the wastewater department when we do any of our projects. Our previous project that we had done with the digesters, we ended up getting grant, or not a grant, a bond made for it so that we could get our cash funding reimbursed. But the majority of the time, we're trying to find any kind of grant or loan that would be in our best interest so that we're not using the cash and we can hold it. I mean, we've been working also with the Southwest Environmental Center. They're the finance center. Let me find the name here. Southwest Environmental Finance Center through UNM. So they're another option that we're using to try and just get into more of the grants that we can, that somebody couldn't just do searching alone. So that location helps us also. We also have internal people that help us with the grants that is their job is to search for them.
Okay. And so given that this resolution passed 2 years ago, I'm a bit surprised that there's nothing been brought before the governing body in relation to especially the wastewater treatment plant. This is an issue that's been going on for more than 2 years prior to this resolution passing. And so I don't know, maybe, I don't know who would be the appropriate person to push this question up to the city manager, given that this resolution directed him to take action and apply for funding. And my question is, what has been done? Because it was at around that time period when the federal infrastructure bill was passed. And this is the same funding source that I spoke about last meeting over a month ago. EPA, there's $100 million available in funding.
Madam Chair, Counselor Garcia, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we do have John Dupuy on Zoom and he has his hand up. Perhaps he would like, he's not a visible participant, but he can speak, I believe. And oh, here's Ben doing some magic in the behind the scenes there. We're coming your way, John. Thank you so much.
Director Dupuy, can you hear us? And are you able to unmute?
We can't hear you yet.
We do see your hand.
While we wait for Director Dupuy, Madam Chair, Counselor Garcia, might I make a couple comments? From the perspective of water, one of the only project in this particular loan that's contemplated is Nichols Dam, and we have pursued state funding for that, grants and loans. We haven't heard back on that yet. And also are looking at a active FEMA grant for that work as well. And I would say that the Water Division as a whole has continued to pursue funding opportunities from wherever they seem worth pursuing. I also might, I don't have the resolution in front of me that you're looking at, but one of the requirements that we have when we do apply for state funding through the Water Trust Board is that we get a resolution so that that funder knows that we have been directed by the governing body to seek such funding. And so pretty much every year we pass a similar resolution, and we take it very seriously, trying to find grants where we can to ease the burden on our ratepayers.
Thank you, Director Roach. I appreciate that clarification, but I think I'm in particular looking at what federal or other outside of the funding source you had mentioned. I mean, because especially on the federal level, there is a wealth of resources available that have been sitting out there. And my question, I guess, to the city manager is, because he would be the appropriate person to ask this to, is what work has been done, what limitations might have prevented us from applying from resources? Is it, I know in some instances, when you're applying for federal resources, you have to have an audit done. And I don't know if that was preventing us over the last couple of years. These are, so I think this is where maybe I'll reach out to the city manager for some clarification, just because, as I mentioned in a previous meeting, I don't want us to immediately go after loans and get ourselves tied up in loans when there are resources available federally. And I know Director Dupuy said, well, this is just to get the project started. Well, this is work that should have been done 2 years ago, if not prior. And so that's where my concerns come in regards to what work was done, why wasn't it done?
Madam Chair, Counselor Garcia, a little bit of insight I can give to that is that we have been delayed on receiving state funding because of the audit status, but not federal funding. And we have received within the past several years, when we were not audit compliant, $6 million, around $6 million of federal funding towards our San Juan Trauma Return Flow project. And at that time, that was a 25% match of the estimated project costs. And we're returning to that same grant again to try and expand that because the project costs have gone up. We did apply for a big ecosystem restoration type grant from the federal government that we didn't receive because, we didn't receive, not due to anything on our end. And as I said, we are actively working on a FEMA high hazard dam related one. And so to my understanding in terms of the funding that we seek from water is that we evaluate potential opportunities, look at whether we think it's worth our effort. And then if it is, we either use some internal staff time or we move forward using our on-call engineering to help us with those grant applications. And in this case, this loan, 0.01%, we feel like is something that if we can secure it, it's a backstop that would be very intelligent for us to have as we work through alternate funding mechanisms for these projects.
Understandable. Again, I guess my concern is our first, or from my perspective, I would hope we would go after grant funding being the first step. You know, and we just heard about the fluctuation and sedimentation proposal that was done in 2021, right? I mean, those are things where we know it's work that needs to be done. Why have we not applied for resources for that versus having to dip into our water enterprise fund? Those are the things our mindset should be first, okay, let's go after other resources versus looking internally or city resources or applying for a loan. That should be kind of the last case scenario. I understand under emergency time critical situations, we've got to spend our own resources. But when there's a situation where it can be planned out and we know an infrastructure is aged, we should be applying for the grants to get the resources and then maybe offset any costs with enterprise funds, alone, et cetera. I think that's the challenge I have. And is that, can you help me understand the process? Is that currently the way it operates? Do you go after grant funds first and then, or is that not part of the process?
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, absolutely our preference is grant funds. So I agree with you wholeheartedly there. And I also would agree that in general, we'd prefer not to push off a bunch of debt to the future. But in the case of a 0% loan, in some ways, it is actually behooves us to do so if we can.
Okay. And is Director Dupuis on? able to-
He is, Counselor, and he has his hand up. I do not know whether he's been able to.
John Dupree is not accepting the promotion to panelist. He needs to accept the promotion.
Okay, Director Dupuis, if you can hear us, you need to be promoted into the meeting so that we can hear you. I do see your hand raised. Okay, you can try whatever magic we can work to unmute him from our side. Director Dupuis has taken his hand down. I don't know if that means he can't.
I guess maybe I'll ask the question to Director Dozier, and if you can answer, then we can maybe go for Director Dupuis. But in regards to the repayment plan, can you help me and the public understand how we are going to come up with the revenues that are ultimately going to pay back this loan?
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, not completely understanding your question.
So what's being proposed here is for the city to take out a loan,
Yes,
in essence. I mean, very low interest bearing loan, but it's still a loan nonetheless. And so my question is, what is the plan for the city to come up with the revenue that is ultimately going to pay back this loan? Because the money has to come from somewhere to pay the loan payment. Where is the money going to come from?
so the money would come from our customers. There's no other place the money would come from. It would come from our revenues that we get pulled in, and we're already looking at raising rates, but for a whole different reason. So it just adds to it. You would still be paying, the customer would pay the final cost.
Okay, so what is, Director Dupuy, or you can answer this. I know we had talked about in this committee about a potential 4% rate increase each year over 4 years.
Mhm.
Is this loan is taking that into consideration? This is part of that 4% increase.
It was taken into consideration getting that 4% number.
Okay, and so that, I know last time we talked about this or the increases, that ultimately shows up on an individual's monthly utility bill. And I know last time I called it a water bill, but because I immediately, not a water bill, but it's the utility bill that covers sewage, water, trash. It will show up on that monthly bill, correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay. And so I guess taking that into consideration, I still have the same concerns as I did when we were given the proposal for 4%. Because it still would impact an individual. And I know it was mentioned that there are instances where there is supporting funds available for an individual who can't pay their utility bill, but they have to qualify for that. It's not a process of somebody calling up on a monthly basis and saying, I can't pay my utility bill this month. Can I get some support? There's a formal process to that. And can you help the public understand what that process looks like? Because I don't want the public to be confused that should their rates increase, that the city has a pot of money just to give out to folks should they need it.
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, I do not know the process of that fund or how it works. I would be the wrong person to answer that. I could ask possibly Nancy.
Sure. And Director Dupuy still.
Yeah, we had, Counselor, if we can go through the chair, we did have Director Dupuy there. Director Dupuy, again, I'll ask if you're able to unmute and talk to us here in the chamber.
I am. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you for joining us. There are a number of questions being asked about this item of taking out $151 million loan from the New Mexico Environment Department. One question outstanding is how repayment of the loan will be achieved. And let's start there.
Repayment of the loan would be achieved by it being spread out over extended loan period of time, which we have up to 30 years. The specific details are not completely put into a subsequent contract. That would be the next step. And ultimately, just ballpark figure, because we have multiple projects, for every $30 million that we would borrow, it's approximately $800,000 of cost per year. And then that they have a very flexible potential for us to have our initial loan payments lower so that it can not need as high an increase, and that the increase that's needed over time grows from the 800,000 by an amount less than the inflation, which we always estimate slightly above 2%. So that 800,000 could safely grow at a 2% rate, and inflation would keep up with that amount, so that the ratepayer isn't feeling a difference in cost, and enables us to have a lot less impact to them over time. So if there's very small increases over time, it moves with how everyone's pay moves with time, and then that helps us make our services affordable.
Director Dupuy, just so I made sure I understood you correctly, for every 30 million that is borrowed, that's an annual payment that's due of $800,000.
Correct. And that's one scenario. There are many funding arrangements, but just as a back of the napkin to give some correlation, we have some water projects, some environmental services division projects, and some wastewater division projects. That number I picked specifically because it was in the range of the different project sizes, and it was multiple of the largest project. So 3 times that, so 2.4 million would be for the 90 million for the wastewater plant in additional annual expenses. And then there's a presentation that we can provide on the comparison if we would take out, revenue bonds or any other type of loans with typical interest rates, and it's a staggering savings. So for the same annual payment, we get a lot more purchasing power and ability to reduce the impacts to our ratepayers because of it.
Okay, and so one thing I'll request, or at minimum for, should this go to a final governing body vote, that a proposed plan that shows where the revenues or the costs per year to the city, because you were throwing out a bunch of different numbers, and I'm just going to go off the initial numbers that you had thrown out. For every 30 million, it's $800,000 payment on an annual basis. Using that calculation, if we were to borrow 150 million, that's a $4 million a year payment. And so what I would like to see is what the proposal is to come up with the revenues for the $4 million per year, and how many years that would ultimately would take to pay that back, just for my knowledge, and ultimately for the public's knowledge as well, because this is a loan that will be in place for a while, and I definitely would like to have all information in front of us to understand what we are really getting into with this. Another question I had for you, Director Dupuy, was, and I don't know if you were online when I went over the resolution that was passed 2 years ago around seeking federal funding or state funding. And I know this is in particular state funding, but I'm more so interested in grants, not necessarily a loan. And what grants have we applied for over the last 2 years, whether it be state or federal grants?
We have applied for grants since I've been here, which isn't quite 2 years. And I can speak to those. Regarding prior to that, I'm not aware, but I can definitely do a little historical research on what we may have applied for. And the list that I have, I was able to listen, and I just made a few notes regarding what I remembered. But one of them was mentioned, which was the watershed restoration grant through the Water Smart program, the Bureau of Reclamation's Water Smart program. We also had a process through the Army Corps of Engineer funding requests. I won't get the terminology right, but we work with a consultant who's an expert in federal, state, even local support for funding needs, and they can give us a presentation. We anticipate providing one to the Public Works and Public Utility Committee meeting in the near future. And they can go into the detail of all the terminology, but there's a 2-step process. One where you basically are noted for a type of project and amount of funding through federal legislation. That's actually occurred for $20 million for our wastewater plant. And then there's a second step where you have to get on the Army Corps of Engineers project lists, approved projects lists, and then it also has to be appropriated or funded at the federal level. So we continue to pursue that. Then there is the emerging contaminant funding. So the county and the city were co-applicants on the emerging contaminant funding. the New Mexico Environment Department is who it's through. It's a program that my understanding, and I believe Rhonda Holdeman is there, and she can talk to this much better than I can. It had $459,000 last year, and I believe it's anticipated to have $1 million for the next 4 years, so $1 million each year. We applied for that. The county received it. You know, ultimately, you mentioned at the last meeting where we discussed Commissioner Green and co-applications between city and county. We definitely partner to make sure that anything we can do to strengthen our applications and increase the likelihood of available funding to us, especially subsidized funding like grants or appropriations, are maximized. And the last one was the Water Trust Board now allows for wastewater projects to be submitted for Water Trust Board funding. So we're preparing prior submittals of wastewater project funding needs and project descriptions for the Water Trust Board process. And nothing specific in terms of like an application, but we do work with our legislators for appropriations on a regular basis. And there's also the ICIP, and often those result in subsidies like the $1.6 million we received last year from the state.
Okay, thank you, Director Dupuy. So I want to zone in on the wastewater treatment plant because that's the majority of the resources. I mean, it's over $100 million. And so out of all of those grants that you applied for, and I was trying to take them down as quickly as you were speaking, you spoke about the wastewater treatment plant to a tune of $20 million. Did I record that correctly?
That's correct. That was our, I don't know the terminology, but it's that first step in the Army Corps of Engineers funding process. I'm not gonna get it right, so I'll wait until we have the consultants that can explain it correctly. But it's basically, it was listed in one of the federal bills that passed and was signed into law, but it doesn't actually fund it. It just is the equivalent of like authorized without funding. And there's a multiple step process to then obtain that funding. And so we're pursuing that for, it has multiple uses that are potential uses for the funding, with the wastewater plant and the return flow pipeline being very specifically focused on the intention for that funding.
Okay, thank you, Director Dupuy. And I guess my next question is, and I don't apologize because sometimes grants are very complicated and there are restrictions to how funds are used. From prior conversation, I was given the impression that there was some research or investigation into EPA funding. As I mentioned, there's the city qualifies for $100 million from funding from EPA. Do you know if that funding can be used to repay a loan? Sometimes there are limitations around federal sources being used for match, prohibited usage of the funds. So I guess my question is, do you know whether that particular potential source of funding or any others would prohibit its award being used to pay back a loan?
So we did investigate that. We reached out to Heather from the Southwest Environmental Finance Center, and she reached out to her contacts at EPA just to verify her understanding. And ultimately, the program name is WIFIA. There's a $20 million minimum for large projects. And my understanding is there's no maximum. There's a mandated interest rate. Currently, it's above 4%. And also, it is a 49% match, and it's 100% loan. and it does not have potential for conversion to grant or forgiveness is another term often used for that same idea. Whereas the Clean Water State Revolving Fund program that we're applying through for the loan at 0.01% interest does have a lot more flexibility, doesn't have a match requirement, and also has potential for loan forgiveness to the extent there's some funding available for that, and we qualify the requirements for any potential forgiveness that happens on a given year-to-year basis. My understanding is we could also have the environmental department staff responsible for how that works explain it further, but that was the general understanding provided to me.
Director Dupuy, we have Director Roach at the podium to add to your answer, if that's okay.
Thank you. Please.
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, one other clarification I do want to make regarding this loan, and I believe Rhonda Holderman is available to correct me if I don't have this exactly right. If we approve taking this loan, we're not going to take $151 million into our account tomorrow and start paying interest on it. We will only take that loan as we work on the projects. And I believe there's even a little bit of a grace period between the time you pay an invoice with this loan amount and then when you actually start paying it down. So you may have all been completely aware of that. I just wanted to make that clarification in case.
Thank you. I appreciate that because that was a question I was going to ask you. Back to you, Councilor Michael Garcia.
Thank you. And I definitely was aware of that. And Director Dupuy, you had mentioned the programs you just spoke about were additional loan funds, but there are grant funds available, if I'm not mistaken, that do not need to be repaid back. Can you tell me, should we qualify for any of those loans? I mean, those grants, would those funds be allowable to be used to pay back a loan?
Would the grant funding through the EPA be allowed to pay back the loan that we would be taking out through the Clean Water State Revolving Fund? I was just trying to clarify the question, Councilor Garcia. Is that correct?
That is correct, Director.
Great. My understanding is I'd have to understand the details of the grant program through the outreach with Heather from Environmental Finance Center. The understanding I have is that grants up to that amount are not available. And, I'm here at King County wastewater, it's the Brightwater wastewater treatment plant facility. King County recently had epic amounts of EPA funding approved, and they are in similar situations as us and trying to rebuild aged facilities. And ultimately, theirs are all loan, and it's through that WIFIA program. And so I'm more than happy to follow up with anyone who has better information, but we've reached out to our consultants who their expertise is supporting communities with this type need. And I'm unaware of any $100 million grant potential.
Okay, and I think maybe Director Dupuy, we can follow up offline around that, because I definitely know there are some opportunities that are at that amount. And I think that's where exploration needs to be taken into consideration, just because I think, as you mentioned, it depends. And I'd hate for us to be in a situation where we apply for a high value grant and hope to use those funds to repay a loan and it not be allowable. So I think this is where we need to make sure our ducks are in a row. And it's important that the research be done into the available resources that are out there for us to apply for. I gave the example last time of, a person that's starting off college doesn't immediately go and apply for a student loan. They at least see if they qualify for financial aid. And that kind of gets to the question I asked at the beginning around the resolution that was passed by us in regards to what financial aid have we applied for? What have we been told we don't qualify for? Because I think that would help us really to not only with these projects, but the whole gamut of projects that our city infrastructure currently needs. So I think Director Dupuy, let's follow up offline in regards to some of these grants, because again, I don't want to put the burden of this loan repayment on the backs of the residents of Santa Fe when there is resources that the city could potentially apply and qualify for. With that, no other questions, Madam Chair. Thank you. Thank you, Director Dupuy. I really appreciate all the additional info, as well, Director Dozier and Director Roach.
Counselor Castro, do you have any questions? Counselor Lee Garcia had to board an airplane and had to sign off. I do have a couple of questions that have come up tonight. And I'm not sure, Director Dupuy, you may be the right person. Director Roach, you may be the right person. The resolution that was brought up, part of the reason, and I want to emphasize this, part of the reason why that resolution was passed is so that you could actually go and apply for some of this grant funding. And I think that was stated, but I want to underline and emphasize that.
Madam Chair, without reading the specific resolution, I can't answer that completely 100%, but I know that every year we do pass a resolution directing us that way so that we can apply for Water Trust Board funding. And so I believe that's likely the resolution that Councilor Garcia has.
Okay, and I do have it in front of me, and the now therefore be it resolved by the governing body of the city of Santa Fe that the city manager is directed to apply for funding and bring specific agreements for such projects for approval by the governing body, identify legislative priority list for presentation to the city's public works, public utilities, and governing body, submit an application to the New Mexico Water Trust Board, and for all project types eligible for consideration, including but not limited to list, and that the FY 24-28 infrastructure capital improvements list is attached as Exhibit A. And then the other piece that it says is that, it directs that the city manager identify opportunities for seeking this kind of funding. And I was one of the sponsors on this. And as I recall, it was something that when you apply for funding, you can't just as staff say, yeah, we want to apply for this. You have to have some direction from the governing body in order that they ask you, are you applying for this legitimately, have the correct authorities in your city government allowed for this? And I believe that's why we pass it. So maybe we can get clarification on that. There isn't specific language in it, but as I recall, as one of the sponsors, that's one of the reasons why we do it, is so you have that when you have to fill out the forms for grants.
Madam Chair, yes, ma'am. Especially that it lists New Mexico Water Trust Board specifically leads me to believe that that is the resolution that we pass each year so that we have direction to go after that funding.
Okay. And then the memo in the packet says that the loan will be payable and collectible solely from the city's pledged revenues. What does that mean?
Madam Chair, if I could.
Yes. However we want to, and I'm sorry, Ms. I'm sorry, I can't even see your name. Holderman? Yeah. I see your hand raised. I don't know if you were wanting to jump in on the first question or independently on something else. And I'm happy to defer to you now or loop back around.
Okay,
You're
well,
muted. Oh, yeah, there you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, and maybe you could just tell the chamber and those watching who you are and why you're with us.
Okay, my name is Rhonda Holderman, and I'm the financial manager for loans and grants with the New Mexico Environment Department. We manage the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, as well as another loan fund called the Rural Infrastructure Program and the Environmental Infrastructure capital outlay for most projects. So water, wastewater, solid waste that goes through capital outlay. The first thing I wanted to point out to you all is that this is a lot of money. We know that. And although I run a loan program, you know, I'm a ratepayer. I don't live in Santa Fe, but I have utilities as well. Free money is always better than loan money. We all get that. Loan money is available, however, and available to use pretty much right now. There is no obligation to take the full 151 million if you don't need it. So you can start the projects, get the ball rolling, and if you find other grant money, you're certainly welcome to use it. I am not familiar with grant money that can be used to repay loans, but it certainly can be used to defer the cost. And if you don't use the money, then you're not paying it back. So as Jesse Roach said, you just draw it down. It's a construction loan. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. The pledged sources of repayment are the divisions that are doing the projects. So either the water division for Nichols Dam, the solid waste division for that project, or the wastewater division for the wastewater treatment plants and sewer lines and things like that. So that is what we're talking about on that. And I'm available for any other questions if you all have anything else.
Thank you. Really appreciate you joining us. Director Dupuy, did you want to add to that? I think it does answer the question about the loan will be payable and collectible solely from the city's pledged revenues.
No, Madam Chair, I was hoping that Mrs. Holdeman would be available for providing the response to that question. So that worked out great.
Okay. And I again, I don't know whether is this for you, Director Dupuy or Director Roach, but and maybe actually for Ms. Holderman, given your experience as a grant, your role with grants in terms of these kinds of scales of projects. I mean, these are enormous projects. They cost a lot of money, and most cities have to draw on a variety of resources in order to achieve them. We can't really assume that one source will do this. I mean, we want to find the path that makes the most financial sense and costs us the least amount of money, but these types of projects require lots of different pieces in order to actually achieve them. And I guess I defer to Ms. Holderman, and then Director Roach, maybe you want to chime in there too. Or Director
I think you're
Dupuy.
absolutely right. These types of projects usually have multiple funding sources. The Clean Water State Revolving Fund is a program that is in all 50 states and Puerto Rico. New Mexico, it is an underutilized program in New Mexico. That's why we lowered our interest rate to 0.01% so that we could move some money. But there are a lot of states that it is the only way that they fund some of these major infrastructure projects. WIFIA, which John was talking about earlier, WIFIA is a program that funds huge projects. It funds billion-dollar projects in San Diego and the Narragansett Bay and places like that. So those folks are taking out loans to pay for that type of infrastructure in those places. You know, I think the infrastructure is sorely needed in Santa Fe, and this is a way that we can help get the ball rolling. And then as we as we work and develop, you know, a relationship with the city, then we can just kind of keep moving on and looking at all of the opportunities that we have. So John mentioned the emerging contaminant funding. That is something that came through the bipartisan infrastructure law. That is 100% grant funding. It is not that much money in the grand scheme of things. As he mentioned, it was 459,000 was our first grant for the entire state. And then we have 4 years of $1 million through the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. And so that's really more focused on the wastewater side of things and stormwater. The Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, I will say, and just give a shout out, also has grant money for emerging contaminants. You know, if in the same kind of manner. I mean, it's bipartisan infrastructure law funding. That's 100% grant. Other than that, there's not a lot of 100% grants that I'm aware of in big dollars. Congressionally directed spending earmarks through the federal government have become popular again. But it's not that much money. We had a year where we had 4 or 5 projects in New Mexico get $900,000. I think we've got a couple that are getting maybe just over $1 million. And you know, that all adds up when you're cobbling your funding sources together. But very few places are going to fund whole projects that way. And so that's where we can come in with our loan funding, because we do have some of the deep pockets and can help fund the whole projects and get projects 100% completed as well.
Yeah, thank you. That you bring up a number of good points, cobbling 100% completion. And then I think, you know, speed at which we can get completed is probably also a factor and part of the reason why this loan is attractive, not only because of the low interest rate, but really the great terms. We don't have to pull it all down. We can use it as we go, but it does get us started in something that is very critical to this community right now with an aging and defunct plant. So, you know, time is of the essence here as well. So that's another really important piece.
Yes, and as far as I know, prices haven't gone down any in recent years at all. So
Right.
We can probably guess that prices will only go up again. So getting
Right.
it done now may save future money.
All the more reason why the timing is critical. Director Roach, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. I'm guessing not, because our expert here is pretty good, but don't want to shut you down. So we have been considering, this committee did get a presentation on possibly raising the wastewater utility rate 4% for the next 3-4 years, something like that. I just want to be clear that in your presentation to us, the reason for that is not only these big scale infrastructure projects we have with updating our plant, but also just the operations and maintenance. Even if we weren't doing this big project, we would still be facing a rate increase just for operations and maintenance.
That is correct, Chair.
Okay. I think that I don't want that to get lost, that we're doing the rate increases solely because of the aging infrastructure and the real important need to update it, but that just operations and maintenance is also getting more expensive and is driving those increases, the need for those increases.
That is correct, Madam Chair. Everything has gone up in cost and we have no way to control any of that. And we do have to look forward to making sure that we can afford to pay for all those operation and maintenance. It has to be done even while we're waiting to rebuild a new facility.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. Thank you for that. And I think Director Roach already made the other point that I want to make sure we emphasize is that what we're getting is the ability to take $151 million loan. We are not saying that that's how much money we're going to need to have loaned to us. It's basically, it's like when you get a credit card, right? And they say you've got $20,000 that you can use on your credit card. That's your limit. And so basically this loan, our limit is 151 million, but we don't necessarily have to pull it all, especially if we get some of this grant money, which will be really important to this project.
That is correct, Madam Chair, and it takes back to the conversation of cobbling everything together to try to complete 100% of whatever project is.
Right. Okay, well, I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate Ms. Holderman, you being here and the other staff and Director Dupuy. I don't know if you have anything else you wanted to add at this moment.
No, Madam Chair.
But appreciate you working to join us tonight. I know you're doing other important work by visiting facilities that might be models for us. So that's super important. And I appreciate you taking the time tonight to join us. If there are no other questions, are we ready for a motion? Move to approve. And I will second. And if we could, I don't know what we do here in terms of a roll call. Maybe we do a roll call just because we've had people on Zoom, even though we do not have counselors on Zoom at the moment.
Certainly, Madam Chair. Counselor Alma Castro,
Yes.
Counselor Michael Garcia,
Abstain.
and Counselor Mira Worth.
Yes.
I believe motion passes, Madam Chair.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate the conversation this evening. With that, we do not have any discussion items. We do have a piece of legislation that needs to be introduced. It's a resolution approving budget amendments and associated New Mexico Department of Finance Administration local government division schedules, summarizing the fourth quarter amendments and requesting Department of Finance Authority approval of Fourth Amendment budget amendments for fiscal year 2024. I do not see Andy Hopkins in the room, but I think the title speaks for what this is. And so with that, we will consider it introduced. It is going to the Quality of Life Committee on Wednesday, to Finance next Monday, the 29th, and to Governing Body on the 31st. And I believe my understanding is that this is to meet DFA deadlines and why it's being introduced and on that track. So with that, we do not have an executive session. Matters from staff. And I believe we still have Director Dupuy online. And of course, we have Director Wheeler in the chambers.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. No matters from staff at this time.
Director Dupuy,
No matters from staff, Madam Chair.
matters from the committee. Matters from the chair. I am standing in tonight for Counselor Chavez, and our next meeting is